And a pleasant good evening to you. Welcome to The Works. I'm Keith Williams, your host. Hope you're having a great day today. And we have Hank Dearden with us today as our special guest. Uh, really appreciate you coming on with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate being here.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Executive Director of ForestPlanet. We're a 501c3 based in Washington, D.C., but we're chartered to help plant trees around the world. High volume, low cost per tree, to be help planted in the areas where they have the greatest impact on the soil, the local ecology, the communities, the greater environment, and then the people in those communities as well.
Um, why did you start this organization?
I just felt there was a need. It's kind of a long story. I was working at a similar organization for years, and I just didn't think they were fulfilling their potential. And we sort of, came to we had discussions. I'll just put it that way. And I decided that I just needed to start my own. My background is actually in math and engineering, which I studied, but I've spent my life in marketing and sales and business development, and realized that what's really needed here is a good connector between people who want to do good and businesses who want to do good and people who are doing good around the world that don't really have, if you will, the marketing chops to get their brand out, and make those connections, and also sort of put together systems for monitoring and evaluation and package it, if you will, so it's a nice neat 15 cents a tree, and trees get planted, and I sort of connect the two worlds, and everyone benefits. So that's it's a very rewarding job that I have now.
Would you consider yourself to be like an environmentalist, or have you worked with environmental groups in the past?
What I consider my sure some people might consider myself an environmentalist. I think I'm more someone just an empiricist. An empiricist is sort of fact-based reality, and the simple reality is that we got a small blue marble that we're living on amidst a giant, unfathomably huge, black, empty, soulless, warmthless, lightless void, and without our little blue marble, we're done. So I think the practical reality is that you don't kind of mess with your nest. You got to take care of it. So I guess I put myself more in the empiricist. I guess that maybe if you're doing the Venn diagram, probably overlaps with the environmentalist most of the time. But maybe empiricist is a better description.
I don't know if you explained what that term means, but did you explain what that means?
Empiricist is someone who's just show me the money, show me the beef, show me the facts. I'm fact based. Evidence. Show me the evidence. Show me the empirical facts or the empirical data behind your position or what you're talking about, and then I'll consider that. So the simple, facts of the matter is that we got a small planet. We got to take care of it.
I think you have quite a bit of environmentalists or activists or advocates kind of sort of follow that model as well.
Sure.
You know, they want the facts, not to mention the truth.
No. Yeah.
And
Facts, truth. Yeah.
they do a lot of research. And that's something that, a lot of those groups I just mentioned, they really don't want to, do that. They just want to be out in front of the camera, or have a microphone in their hand, or something like that. They don't take the time to do all the lead work so that, they can be out there and then they can make sense, and by having those facts and information, then that will compel people to, you know, be down with the cause. I like to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't speak for everyone, and I'm not going to point fingers or anything, but I do get involved with some environmental films. And one of my consistent frustrations with them is that a lot of times they're long on emotion. Like I saw a movie about sharks and how good they are, and apex predators, and it was a long movie, and it was long on emotion and very short on facts, and it was very frustrating because the facts were on their side. If they had just sort of done a little homework and sort of explained what apex predator means and how important those are with food chains and systems, it would have helped their cause. But no, they were kind of just doing a big long sob story about how terrible it is to kill the sharks. And it is terrible to kill the sharks and how they were doing it. And they were right. But, mix up some facts with the sob and you make a more powerful presentation.
So you would consider your organization to be a non-governmental organization rather than a non-profit
They're both.
organization?
Yeah, it's both an NGO, non-governmental organization. A lot of times they overlap. So I'm a 501c3 and a nonprofit. So it's both. Yeah.
Okay. So for those of you who are on here and saying, are there two different things, an NGO and an NPO? Is there like a distinction between a nonprofit organization and a non-governmental organization?
I think there is. I mean, there's some, but I don't know exactly what it is. I honestly, it's a good question because I do see a lot of times the two expressions kind of being used interchangeably. But so I'm sorry, I can't tell you exactly, what's the technical distinction of them, but I kind of use both. Technically, I'm both. I mean, technically, I am a 501c3 nonprofit organization registered here in Washington, D.C., operating around the planet. So that's the technical. So yeah, I'm a nonprofit and non-government in that I'm not really working through governments. I don't work with our government. I don't work with governments in the foreign countries. I work with local organizations that are already up and running, and we kind of skate below the governmental radar, if that helps explain things. Other people,
Uh,
yeah, other 501c3s do work with international governments, and they have those relationships, and that's fine. That's part of their model. It's not yet part of mine. I'm not saying it will never be, but it's not how it is now.
just to get us a few details and facts about Hank for our audience. Hank is the founder and executive director of ForestPlanet, a 501c3 that supports large-scale, low-cost per tree reforestation efforts all over the world. We help plant trees where they bring the most benefits to the region's soil habitat, the global environment, and local community. Hank said he's happy to now leverage years of experience in the field of advertising, marketing, and business development to benefit the mission of our environmental organization. He is comfortable talking about business of running a growing non-governmental organization, as well as features, benefits of our large-scale tree planting program. Um, so how does the tree planting program, how does that work?
So there are many forest restoration projects around the world that are, if, like I mentioned, kind of below the radar. But if you're in the developing world and pick a problem, any problem, and you pull the thread, pretty soon you run into forest degradation, and because the trees help secure soil, and if the soil goes away, then you got problems. So as I say, with trees you got soil, and with soil you have options. So the trees check a lot of boxes in that regard. If planted in the right way, in the right species, at the right time, in the right manner, and that they're healthy seedlings and the seedlings have been grown properly, the transformation of cell size, or the planting sites as we call them, can be quite rapid within a couple of years. And while sure they do their part to help sequester carbon, pull carbon out of the greater environment, help cool the planet by degree. It's really about the local restoration, because a lot of times what the trees will do is revitalize soil, because the tree roots will hold water. And when you have water, you have a chance for at least some life to develop in the soil. All the fungi and all the little bugs and all the germs and everybody down there sort of doing what they do. Soil is a very complicated ecosystem, and it needs air and it needs water like any other living thing. And the trees kind of help provide that, plus other nutrients. So there's a lot going on. It's a real dynamic system. And then when you do have that, a couple things happen. A lot of times the trees can be used if, again, the right species are planted in the right place at the right time. Their root systems can help replenish aquifers, groundwater aquifers that have been degraded over time. Because obviously in these communities, if there's no water, then you got refugees. You have what you have going on in like in Ethiopia right now, where yes, there's been a drought, but there has been some water, but they've been cutting down all the trees over the years too for short-term benefit, and that leaves the soil exposed, and now you got a hard pan where the soil's dead, it's now dirt. It's almost like concrete. It won't support life. But if again, like I said, if done the right way, the trees can help reintroduce water to the soil, and the soil can now be arable in a certain way, because you can then also intercrop or plant crops around the trees, in and amongst the trees. And sometimes the trees are fruiting trees like avocados or berries or what have you, but a lot of times that they hold the soil, and then you can intercrop your corn, your potatoes, your yams, or what have you between them. Why? Because you now have vibrant soil, and you also have water to support the ground crops. And now you have an ecological system that's all sort of working and then simpatico and going in the right direction. Getting the better the ground crop cover, the better the soil, and the better the trees, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of like, those are the machines that we're trying to sort of get going in the right way. And the tree is kind of like, almost imagine a point of an inverted pyramid, where once you get the tree planted, a lot of things can start growing up from it, and realize a lot of benefits to the community, including now food security and income security, and water, and all the things necessary for the communities to survive.
Do you do any type of work in California as far as trees is concerned? Because I think in the last maybe about 5 to 10 years, there's been a lot of wildfires
Oh yeah.
out in California.
So our model is actually much larger scale, but lower cost. So our published price and our businesses that we work with, it's 15 cents a tree. And it adds up because the Western dollar, if you will, the US dollar, goes very, very far in the developing world. You cannot plant a tree in the United States for less than $3-4, depending on where you are. So it's an order of magnitude higher, because our costs are higher all the way around, with labor and gas, and all the stuff. So we really actually work in the developing world. We're coming up on our first 1 million trees. We need to do those, every few months, and then every few weeks, and then every day, to really make the impact. So for example, we're supporting so far 4 planting sites in Tanzania in Africa, where I went and visited in June, again, where the dollar goes very far. And those combined sites are about 500,000 trees. But I saw dozens and dozens of more sites just in this one little area of Tanzania where we were. Tanzania alone could hold another billion with a B trees. And you can do that for $150 million, or the price of a couple of missiles, honestly. And that would be completely transformative for that part of the world. So our model isn't set up to support stuff in the United States. There are other organizations who do. Their model is different, and that's fine, and that's great. But this is the area where we're focusing, is on international development.
So there are like organizations who are working to restore trees in California.
I'm sure there are. I'd have to do a little research and do a quick Google search to find out who they are. I'm sure a lot of them are locally based, and that's great. I think the Arbor Day Foundation is involved with that. That's a U.S. based organization, and their focus is on their program focus. Their tree planting focus is in the States, and that's great. But it's just a different model from how we're organized.
You mentioned something about a low cost tree program.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you mentioned, but did you say it was like 15 cents a tree?
Yes, sir. 15 cents.
So how do you, come with the price of planting each tree?
So, like I said, we're working in the developing world where there's what we do is we find programs that are homegrown that are already up and running. So, for example, in Tanzania, where we were, there's a group there called the Friends of Usambara Society, which is a great organization. They've planted millions of trees. They're from Lushoto, which is not too far from Mount Kilimanjaro. They also have a tourist program. So if you want to go up there, it's absolutely beautiful part of the world. Beautiful mountains, and so there's lots of mountain biking and hiking and what have you going on there. Incredible wildlife. But again, they're in Tanzania. Now in Tanzania, a dollar goes really, really far. For example, we saw one of the planting sites this past June was up on a mountaintop, and there was 170,000 trees that got planted up there. And you want to take them as seedlings. And by I mean by tree is a seedling, which is a seed that's been put in a little container and grown in a nursery so it is healthy. And it can be ready to outplant when it's, depending on the species, 3, 6, 9 inches, however, sort of depends on the species, right? But so once that's ready to go into the field, you have to, physically transform it there. So they load these guys all into trucks, and thousands of them, many tens of thousands of at a time, to get them close to the planting site. But this particular planting site, you were not driving a truck up there because it was almost a 40-degree angle straight up a little narrow deer path that you had to sort of scamper up to get to the planting site. And human beings had to be employed in the local community. And a lot of people wanted to do that work and just carry these things up like 5 or 6 trips a day, and 100 seedlings at a time. And they did that for 3 solid weeks. There was 30 of them. And they were all paid. Everybody was paid at the end of the day 10,000 Tanzania shillings, which in that economy and in that society was pretty good money. They made pretty good money doing that. They were happy with that because they can feed their family with that. Now that translates to $4.20, right? So you just have the incongruities of our economic system and our society here in the States, and working at dollar is what a dollar is. And you take that same dollar and then you put it in a completely different system where prices are lower and wages are lower, but they're at rough equilibrium. You're just going to get a lot more leverage out of it. So if you will, it's like cross-country economic inefficiencies, if you will. I'm sure there's an economic term for it, so I just made one up. But that's what we're leveraging here. And that's to everyone's benefit, because in the United States, people want to plant these trees. And if you can say, hey, you can do it, and it's not financially painful, you can still live your life. It doesn't take that much money to have an impact, and they're happy to hear that. And the people in Tanzania, they're very happy because now they've got this income and they've got this steady money coming in. Plus, they got the trees, and the trees on that hillside were necessary to revitalize a whole hillside, mountainside, if you will, that had been degraded for multiple reasons, fire, climate change, encroachment by the villagers. And what had happened is that right at the bottom of that, like just south of that, downhill from that planting site, there's a big well that had been drying up for years, because during the rainy season, it does rain. And if the trees aren't there to catch the rain and sort of spongify the soil, if you will, then that rain just runs right off. It does not get down into the aquifer. And once it's in the aquifers and the wells, then it sort of, eases out over the course of the year, and you got steady water supply, as opposed to a big, rush of water every for 3 months out of the year, and then a trickle for the rest. It's very hard to work around. So it was really actually a water management project, and everybody was on board with that. So they got paid to help secure their water supply, and 170,000 trees got planted, and that's a whole lot of carbon over the lifetime of those trees. So everybody wins.
Is there a relationship between trees and flooding?
Yeah, like I just explained, I mean, depending on where you are, I mean, you know, a lot of times flooding is too much water. Sure, you know, you get dumped on wherever you are. You know, if you get 20 feet, 20 inches of water overnight, you're going to flood no matter what. But in some areas, if there are trees are properly planted and the root systems are deep, they can absorb the water and hang on to it and channel it into the aquifers where it belongs. And now that reduces the amount of the flood, or maybe the severity of the flood, or the frequency of the flood. So absolutely, again, the trees are all about kind of spongifying the soil and making it able to absorb that water to keep it from running off and, you know, wiping out whole towns and communities.
Right.
Absolutely.
I was gonna say, for example, what if you like live in an urban area? How would that work?
So, I mean, urban areas can have trees too. Now, here in Washington, D.C., we have a wonderful organization called Casey Trees, and that they're all about putting trees like on the sidewalk and in the cityscape. And if you've been to Washington, it's a very green city, right? We've got good green tree cover. And there's a lot of organizations like that all around the country. I think Tree People is in San Francisco, and I know there's one in Philadelphia. I mean, there's a whole association of these municipal tree planting organizations. And again, I don't know the name, but a quick Google and you can find yours. Sure. So it cools the local air in those areas, provides green space, which human beings just like. They're just happier just looking at trees, and absorb water, and do cut down on the runoff that happens. So again, by degree, they can help. It's not it's not a magic pill that's going to solve all the problem. You still have a lot of hard services in cities that you need to rethink, but it's all about how do you properly channel water and either get it right to the sewer or the water disposal system in the proper way, and or into the soil and into the tree, so that it can be absorbed and hang on to keep your city green and healthy in that regard. So that's a whole separate challenge that I'm only sort of peripherally familiar with, but there's plenty of people who could speak much more intelligently on that. But I know it's a thing. I know it happens, and they do a beautiful job. Certainly here in Washington and other cities. But yeah, that's a big challenge, is to sort of cut down on the flooding in the cities, because again, you're looking when the rain hits the top of a building, it's got to run off, or if the rain hits a street, it's going to run off. It can't be absorbed into the concrete or the asphalt. So you have to have really appropriate and intelligently designed water management systems. And I'm starting to see these things more and more. Certainly, like in Tucson, some of the sidewalks, all they had to do was some minor adjustment of the sidewalks. So when it does rain, rarely, but it does, that water is captured and put into the causeways next to the streets or next to the sidewalks to green that city, as opposed to then once a year maybe they get like this big massive dump of rain. It could be a huge flood, but now you've got soil to absorb it because you spongified your soil. You made that soil ready to receive the rain, and that's really the challenge.
Yeah, I actually been to Washington, D.C. a couple of times this year,
Oh yeah.
and I noticed that there are a lot of tree-lined streets to be seen.
Yeah, and and what we're also unique is that we have a height restriction on the buildings. So, and we got wider streets and lower buildings than certainly New York City, and that's on purpose. That's by design. So more light can get in. So when you have more space and more light, you're going to have more trees. So sometimes you're greening a city, you're kind of fighting for space that someone wants to develop. So that's a constant negotiation that every city has to have.
Is there a connection between trees and water availability?
Yeah, like I've explained, certainly in the developing world, I mean, some of these wells are drying up because they cut the trees down, right? And when it does rain, the water runs off rather than being captured and being channeled down into the well system. So yeah, that's the first thing that a lot of times we look at. It's like, what's the water supply and how can we make that more reliable? And the right species, again, planted the right way at the right time in the right manner, can go a long way towards alleviating that problem. Absolutely.
So what kind of trees, are being planted, and where does the seeds come from?
Well, the seeds, our tree planting partners, they always collect them locally. I mean, they're all indigenous. They don't have to, nothing's ever imported. It's all local. In Tanzania, they literally send kids out into the local woods and sort of collect the seeds from the trees without damaging the trees, of course. And they come back with, buckets full of these things for basically free, right? They're just right there. Um, and the different species are all over the map. There's dozens of them, and there's more than I can name. A lot of the different projects that we have on our website, I spell out the specific type of tree that's used in that specific location. So in the Kwazizi site, there's like 2 or 3 different species, and again, I forget what they are. But those were really for stabilizing the soil. The water resource trees tend to be, you're able to plant those more closely together, and they grow quickly and they go straight. Their root systems are straight down, which is, it's sort of like a straw. We're going to funnel this water straight down into the aquifer. And then sometimes the trees and the villagers that we were giving out to, there were like 68,000 trees that we gave out, were more fruiting trees like avocado trees, and fruiting trees like figs and what have you. And those, again, are for economic security for those local people, because what you're asking them to do is not go up and forage in the forest and damage the forest, or encroach, if you will, on the forest. Leave that be. But they have to do it out of economic necessity a lot of times. So what we do is, hey, look, we'll alleviate that economic pressure. Here's an avocado tree that we've grafted such that it starts producing fruit within just a couple of years. And now that's a great source of nutrition for the families. And then in income, they can sell those. So anywhere from 70–80% of the produce is sold in markets. So then they got a little income security, they got a little food security, and there is far less pressure and need for them to encroach upon the forest to survive. So it's all kinds of trees. It really depends on the location, how much water you got, what type of soil you got, et cetera, et cetera. But again, the tree planting partners that we work with, they've got the plan, they've got the model, and they present that to me and they say, okay, this is what we want to do on this plot. Here's why. Here are the species that we're going to work with. Here's how they interact. Here's how it all, the whole is going to be greater than the sum of the parts. Here's how the machine's going to work. And I go, fine, I'll go get the money, or here's the check that I've already raised, and let's do it. So that's the sort of the division of the partnership.
I'm curious to know is what is a carbon credit?
I don't really know,
Mm.
honestly. I think there's a certain amount of calculations that go in for some kind of action that you took or didn't take, and that would have resulted or did result in X tons of carbon being either sequestered or not being emitted, and you get a certain dollar credit. It's like it's a thing, and there's trading for it. There's carbon crafts at caps. So some organizations have a carbon footprint and they really can't reduce it, so they will buy these carbon credits to offset their own activities. I think there's logic in the concept of it, but I am not a carbon market expert, and I don't really get into it. The only time I've really kind of done a deep dive, all I found was a whole lot of inefficiencies and middlemen. And let's just say the actual benefit on the ground was a variable. Sometimes it seemed to be a good thing that people were doing, or maybe they were getting paid for extra money for doing the thing that they were going to do anyway, and now they had this new asset. So I am not maybe that should be your next guest, to have that someone explain that to you, because I think there's a lot of double counting and middlemen and a whole lot of stuff going on. So while I do talk carbon about the trees, We don't really make specific claims of sequestration per tree because it's all over the map. Now, I'm a double major in math and engineering. I love measuring stuff. I told you, I'm an empiricist. Show me the facts, right? The reality is that how much carbon a tree is going to sequester over its lifetime, it's really, it's hard to calculate because of all kinds of reasons. I mean, there could be drought, there could be disease, there could be this, there could be that. And you're really looking at best estimates. I mean, there is a whole study about the carbon sequestration of mangrove trees, which are on the coast. And they're pretty good studies. And, you know, they admit that they're kind of throwing a dart. They're looking for the middle of the bell curve, if you will. But, and it's a lot of carbon. It is a lot of carbon. But rather than sort of getting into making all those claims, only to be challenged by how did we do the calculation and how are you monitoring it and how you're measuring it, I just avoid it and I talk about the benefits of the tree. Sure, carbon's being sequestered. Let's talk about the soil. And let me show you the food that's now being produced from a field that had been degraded that the trees help revitalize, and that transformation taking less than 2 years. I point to that story. So I can, that's a little more empirical story, if you will. And knowing that, sure, carbon's getting sequestered, but I can't tell you exactly how much. And then because I can't tell you exactly how much, I can't even really tell you how much that credit's worth. You know, so I know you asked a simple question. It's a long way of saying I don't know, but I have a lot of questions about the carbon market myself.
Okay, perhaps you can like maybe do some research on that, and we'll have you to come back.
Well, you know what? With all due respect, I think there's other people who are smarter than me. I'd love to come back. It's not that, I promise you. But I kind of steer clear of it because I don't really need it. We can tell some really good stories about tree planting that don't have to sort of wander into the whole carbon credit offset market. We've got some great stories about water restoration and food and soil and income security. And after a while, carbon is, don't forget, it's an invisible gas. It's a necessary one, but we've got better stories than that.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. Now I do know that there are certain parts of the world that still use wood for heat,
Yeah.
and cooking and things of that nature. Is there like an alternative instead of them, cutting down trees for firewood?
Oh, sure. I mean, so it really sort of depends. I mean, you can like in these forests that we're working on, you can, as long as you're working in the community, you can intelligently go through and glean firewood out of them. Just don't clear cut, right? Because you can draw, every 10th, 20th tree down or cut some limbs here and there. Because like in all these places, firewood's a thing. That's where they get their energy. That's it, right? So if you're intelligently managing the resources, you're going to be okay. Just don't go in and wipe out like whole, acres and hectares of wood for firewood. It's a mess. But if you intelligently sort of draw down some wood out of it, you can do it. Now, having said that, a lot of the communities and everyone I talked to when I was in Tanzania would love to have some of these solar stoves, right? And these are fairly cheap systems that capture solar energy and direct it into a spot. And so people cooking at home can boil some water really quickly and then use that water to either heat their house or cook their food or what have you. And they want these, but the price needs to keep coming down. The good news is that some of these communities, now that they have trees generating income for them, after a little bit of a time, the one village I was talking at, I talked with the village elder, and he goes, he absolutely wants these, but what they're going to do is start to pool their resources. So rather than, having one for each individual home, they will have multiple of them at the village center. So you just sort of walk over, boil your water and walk home and all that. So, or strategically put them around the community. So as a shared resource. And that's beautiful. So it's like everybody's got a shared stove, and that works together. And the more you get, the more you get. And again, every time you put one of those in, it's just that much pressure been reduced on the surrounding environment to go capture wood for firewood. So that's one major solution that we're seeing.
Is there a relationship between tree planting and climate change?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, it's trees cool the air, local climates, and then the summation of all those locally cooled areas will impact the greater environment. So absolutely, and again, it's not only just the carbon that's being sequestered by the tree. It gets just too much of the CO2 is in the atmosphere. When you're revitalizing the soil around the tree, that soil is also absorbing carbon to create all the microbial life in the soil. So you get a double whammy, actually, to take that carbon out of the air and reduce the greenhouse blanket effect that's causing the climate change and global warming that we're experiencing. Is it the only solution to climate change? Probably not. I don't usually believe that there's only one thing that can solve it, but is a big part of the answer. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Are there any programs or policies that you support
For what?
in relationship to what you do, or the environment in general?
Well, I mean, I like the trend towards renewables. Absolutely. I used to work at a renewable company. So, like in terms of policies and programs, um, increasing support for distribution of renewable energy sources, offshore wind in the United States should be a thing. It's not really, it could be. And that's a huge source of energy that we have right there. I don't know why it's there. It's usually the fossil fuel companies. I'd like to see a lot of the terms of government policy. There's a big support for the fossil fuel industry now. I'd like to see that go away over time, phase that out. They've been subsidized for years. They're the first people to talk about free market, but then also talk about screaming and yelling when you start to take away their government support. So absolutely alternative fuels, really investing in battery development. That's going to be like if there's one sort of real high fulcrum point to help with alternative energy sources, it's going to be battery storage. A lot of times wind blows at night when people are using less electricity in general. If you can hang on to that, such as there during the day, or use the solar energy that was generated all day during the night and vice versa, it smooths out supply and demand. So battery technologies, batteries, solutions need to be, it's a constant thing. And right now they're heavily dependent on lithium and lots of heavy metals. That's also extractive. So that's also a problem. So are there other battery solutions? I think, carbon nanotubes and carbon fiber, stuff like that, batteries. Again, I'm not an expert at batteries. That could be another whole show. But I think that's like the key. I hate to use the expression holy grail, but that's that's the word that a lot of people use, that the country, the economy that figures out high reliability, low cost, low impact electricity / energy storage via batteries is going to have a huge leg up in the next decades worth of global economy.
So you have two main focuses here. Trees feed the world. What does that mean to you?
Well, like I said, I mean, trees help feed the world because obviously the trees will, fruit as well, but they secure the soil. They allow the soil and to be revitalized and now become arable. And that's the number one thing. They hang on to the water and they make the soil arable. And, without the soil, you got no food, right? With the soil, you still got challenges, but, you got to get it to market and all that kind of stuff. But at least it's a different set of challenges. But with no soil, you got no choice, no nothing. So that's really the connection.
Okay, then we have trees and social stability. What does that mean?
Well, like I mentioned, if these communities have a steady source of income and food security, then you have a little more social stability in the developing world. I mean, you look at a lot of places where there's civil war going on and people are fighting over limited resources. A lot of times what stimulates that is extreme poverty. What we have in the United States here is poverty. Don't get me wrong. It's not a cakewalk. I'm not saying it is, but what you're dealing with in a lot of developing world, there's 1 billion people who are living on less than $1 a day. And we're talking extreme poverty, do not know where their next meal is coming from. And, and those kinds of communities are rife for exploitation, or someone coming in and selling them a bill of goods and all kinds of upheaval and conflict over limited resources. And, the better fed people are and the more stable income they have, the less vulnerable they are to extremism. That's just human nature. So that's what I mean by that.
You also have a blog too, so talk a little bit about your blog.
Well, the blog, it's really where things are happening. We talk about the events that we produce there, or events that we're part of, the trips where we've been to, other research that we've done. We do talk about carbon. There is a blog posted there about blue carbon and mangroves, and then the food connection. But we're really the point of the blog is to really try to educate people that trees are more than carbon, and they are carbon, and that's a very real thing. But there's a lot more to it. It's about the social stability, and it's about the income security and food security and all the above, and water security. And then we talk about the fun stuff we have, like going to events. And for example, we had the honor to be working with DC United, which is our local soccer team here, professional soccer team here in Washington, DC. And they had a sustainability night earlier this year in April, where they raised enough money to get 1 tree planted for every ticket. So that was 20,000 trees in one night, but it only cost $3,000. So 20,000 people in a stadium, everybody basically, 15 cents out of their ticket went to plant a tree. And I would probably made that event carbon negative if I did the calculation, but I didn't. I just know that 20,000 trees got planted, and they're quite transformative of where they're planted. So all that's sort of listed in the blog. We keep a running commentary about our activities and what's going on. So we definitely invite everybody to visit that. Sure.
Do you know of like any sports franchise that are doing something similar to what Washington is doing?
Well, funny you should ask. There's a local there are baseball teams around the country that we've reached out to that are interested, and more on that later, hopefully. These are Major League Baseball, but also some minor league teams around the country in the Midwest. I visited some. Believe it or not, there's a whole league on professional ultimate frisbee, which is a thing. So Ultimate Disc League, and they have teams around the country. And every year for the past 3 years for their championship weekend, they've planted anywhere from 25 to 50,000 trees to help make their whole championship Final Four weekend, if you will, carbon negative, or at least carbon neutral. Again, we didn't do the calculation, but it was a lot of trees, and it probably took a big dent out of their carbon footprint. And so they're kind of on the forefront of that. Here in Washington, D.C., we've got a professional ultimate disc league called the D.C. Breeze, and they plant a tree with every ticket sold all season long. And they'll only sell maybe 8,000 tickets, max all season. But that's more than other folks are doing, and it adds up. So it's a good program that we're trying to exploit. Fingers crossed. I had some great meetings just in August. I took a road trip to the Midwest and stopped in with some major colleges that you've heard of that have very large football stadiums, some of the biggest in the country. And they're interested in working with us either for their football season next year, or even their basketball season this year. So it's kind of like the whole concept of, you want to plant a tree with that, is easily communicated, and it's affordable, and it's effective, and they want to work with us. So that's definitely, I would love to have more case studies within the next few weeks or few months to be able to point to. Now, at the same time, we're also looking at the performing arts groups. So, bands go on the road, and they fill stadiums of, 5, 10, 50, 20,000 people, whomever, right? And those all have carbon footprints. They are traveling, they've got a whole crew. They're in airplanes. They've got a footprint. Maybe they could plant a tree for every ticket it's 20,000 here and 50,000 there and 5,000 there. It adds up. It really is a big thing. I have a great chat going with a small ensemble based in England, of all places, but they travel a lot, and they're aware of their carbon footprint. They want to do something along these lines. So we actually have a chat with them next week, and we'll get something together. And again, it's affordable for them, and it's effective, and it's easily communicated. So all the above, the venues, sports teams, the concert venues, and then even the performing artists themselves, if they want to be involved with this. I'd love to chat with them. Absolutely.
What if you have a nonprofit organization that wants to do something similar to what you're doing? Um, so what kind of pointers or what kind of direction can you give?
I mean, it's like there's lots of models. There's lots of ways to do it. My model is the connector model, where all I focus on is this, communications and educating people whenever and wherever I can, and which is why I totally welcome being a guest on your show. I really appreciate that very much. Helps us get the word out. That's what I do, and then I work with the businesses, like the teams and all the stuff that I've been talking about. And then it's a lot of research in terms of finding out who are the right organizations to funnel money to around the country. That's not an easy process. I do a lot of research and a lot of background, and hire a third-party company to help me do that, do the vetting, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that's just my model, and that's what it is. So anybody can do that. You just got to roll up your sleeves, and certainly it takes money to get it going. But that's what I did, and started in 2017, and was able to work for the first 3 years without any salary, until money started coming in, and now I make a very, very modest salary. I still have to do other jobs to keep this going, but our growth is steady, and there's need out there. It's just a matter of how tight of a network can you put together. You got to just check all the boxes. So that's our model.
Uh, on your spare time, I would like you to do some, research on an, organization called Gulf South for a Green New Deal.
Who? I'm sorry, who?
Gulf South for a Green New Deal.
Okay.
I think that that would be something that that organization would definitely be, interested in doing. I'm actually a part of the Gulf South for a Green New Deal in
Okay.
the Alabama hub.
Well, what do you guys do? What's your model?
Well, basically we are about social justice, and we deal with, I mean, not social justice, but environmental justice.
Okay.
We A lot of the things that are on our radars, of course, is food security, um, eliminating pollution, clean water, clean air, working to have a healthier planet.
Sure. Great. Yeah.
So if you get some time, you can Google, you can do a Google search on them, and you can, kind of get more information about what they do, what their model is, and if it's something, is an organization that you'll be willing to work with, I do encourage you to contact.
Okay. I'll check it out.
Okay, and we're going to get ready to close here. There's some great information here. So really enjoy it. Very educational. Now, hey, how can people be able to reach you? They, want more information. They want to contact you.
Sure. Yeah. The best thing is Forest Planet, one word, forestplanet.org. It's our website. So our phone number, our address, the general email is all there. As you mentioned, like the blog section, the latest, all that information. So yeah, or we can find us on Facebook, and it's facebook.com/go negative. as in go carbon negative. So that's our Facebook link as well. So there's all kinds of information there. But forestplanet.org, absolutely.
Okay, so before we wrap it up here, are there any like last words that you would like to mention to the audience?
I think we've covered everything, and I really, like I said, I want to thank you personally for giving me a chance to speak to your community. I appreciate it.
And this will work no matter where you live in an urban community, suburban community, or rural community. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, which will work?
Urban, suburban, rural.
Well, there are different models for different organizations. Like I said, we're in the developing world, but there's plenty of organizations working in the urban space as well. There's a little different challenges and little different stuff, so that's why they have different models. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Hank, I want to thank you for um, taking time out of your schedule. I know that you've been very busy,
Oh yeah.
and so I would be the first to say thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be on this podcast. The information here was definitely worthwhile, very informative, very educational.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And of course, I learned some things too. I don't call myself an environmentalist. I'm an activist.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a community organizer. So anytime that we have this sort of information, it's a learning. It's a time for learning. For me. Because I got to get educated. On this stuff as well. So
Great.
so that I can tell other people.
Great. Good stuff.
Um, really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And we're going to end here on that note. Uh, Again, we want to thank Hank Dearden for being a part of this podcast. Certainly a very important podcast because we only have one planet, and we definitely need to do all we can to take care of it.
Sir.
Yep. Okay. Thank you everyone for tuning in to this episode of The Works. I'm Keith Williams, your host. Hope you'll be back with us next time. Until then, enjoy your evening.